So hi everyone. I am Breck DuPaul. I've been doing Congress for 3 years now, and 2 years really on the national circuit. I'm from the semi-mid state of Ohio. Don't move out to the Midwest if you're not already here, is what I'd say. And today we're really just going to be talking about the art of early round and talking early. I've sort of become a sponsor spammer on the Nat circuit, especially when there's final appeals, because it's really just overpowered in my mind. And right preparing to speak early also prepares you to speak late. So that's sort of what we're going to get into today. Alrighty. Before we get started, I do want to say there's no one correct way to do things. This is how I do it. It's how I found it to be effective. And yes, there's some absolute truths about authorships or sponsorships or whatever you call it, but there's not only one way to do it. So take what I say um as a model, not as necessarily like the the one path. Okay, so first we want to get into the why. Why do you want to speak early? And it's that you get the opportunity. Well, there's a couple of reasons, but the first is that you get to frame the debate. As the authorship or sponsorship, you dictate the direction that the debate goes into. You set burdens and you create engagement for the neg or the app. So if you have a burden about climate change, or if you have a bill about climate change and you introduce it, not only do you get to um, give the first speech, but you get to explain solvency, you get to quantify or qualify the status quo, and you can create a burden, which is what we're going to talk about later. Like if you set a burden about protecting lives or etc., that automatically can throw out arguments in the judge's mind. So it's really about framing the debate. I like to think of it like you're the artist. You got to sort of lay or you're like the contractor in a house. You got to lay the frame, the foundation or whatever. Also, when you're speaking early, you don't need to go for off the top of the head speaking, and there's more clarity there. You have the opportunity, or you're not reliant on others sort of to be successful. You don't have to adapt to the round if you're the author or the sponsor, because the round hasn't really started yet. Um, and so you don't need to talk off the top of your head or write things on the fly or try and find sort of half good, decent evidence. You have the time before the round to fully prepare what you're going to say, write good rhetoric, and really create that next level of clarity that's going to make you stand out in your judge's mind. And then just you also get a precedence and recency bump. A lot of people, especially in break rounds at national tournaments, never want to give the authorship sponsorship because they feel it's like going to give you bumped down in the ranks. I'd say that's actually very false. A lot of the people that win are the people that speak early because they have the opportunity to speak more, but also because there's certain advantages to it. But you get a precedence and recency bump. So say you're 11th on the P&R chart, because nobody stands for the sponsor or author, you might get bumped up to first, which is a great advantage. But at the very least, if you don't really agree with any of like the last 5 things I've said or 6 things, it prepares you for adaptation, right? You're prepped for the round. You have arguments made. You have a baseline understanding. You're walking into that round knowing or should knowing where it's going to go and the direction it's going to go in. Yes, you can cut claims. You can cut unnecessary data throughout the speech, throughout the round, but you already have a framework to build off of. And so at the very least, it prepares you for adaptation. It prepares you for the round with data, whatever it might be. Okay. So how a round works, this is sort of just introductory stuff. It's like a PF round. A Congress round should, in theory, follow the flow of a PF where you have sort of case. That's the sponsor, the authorship. And then in Congress, not in PF, you'll have sort of like offensive development. That's like extending off the impacts of the authorship, extending off solvency and sort of like creating a buffer zone for the alpha for the neg. Then you have rebuttal, which is going to be like the same in PF where it's one side standing up being like, all of their offense is wrong. It's all false, yada, yada, yada. And then lastly, you sort of have like your synthesis. That's going to be your summary or your final appeal. Um, and that's just sort of at the end of today's debate, here's what we should evaluate like today's round on. Here's what you should vote off of, etc. Today, we're going to be focusing on these two topics that are the first two of like authorship sponsorship and then the offensive development are really just like early round speeches. Okay, so what are we doing today? First, we're going to go into sort of differentiating author versus sponsor versus early round speeches. Sorry, there's a printer going on in the background. Then we're going to go into the structure of an authorship, sort of how I write them and how the general structure of them goes. There's a few things that you need to do and that you have the burden of doing as the author. Then we're going to get into the structure of early rounders. I just abbreviated as ER because I ran out of room, and how this is different than authorships. The structure of early rounders, we're going to go more back to the basics of like strong claim, strong warranting, strong data, strong analysis, and impacts. Because at the end of the day, an early round speech is just like a fundamentally basic, not basic, but fundamentally strong speech that adds content to the round. And then lastly, we're going to go through some rhetoric choices like pixie dusting, frosting of the cake, whatever, sort of how I do it, where you can find good rhetoric, etc. What is bad rhetoric? Oh my gosh, I get very tired of hearing bad rhetoric. And also it can be very much a turnoff for your judges. Like bad rhetoric just is a slap in the face. Okay, the author or sponsorship speech is absolutely overpowered when there are final appeals. I think we see a lot of them at jury tournaments where there's final appeals, but it is amazing. You have all of the upsides of being the author and none of the downsides of being a late round speaker or being an early round speaker, because you do both. You have the final appeal, which is the last speech of the round, which means you get to conclude it. You get double the face time. You have the opportunity for refutation, but you also were the first speaker of the round. So you're the first impression on the judges' minds. You get to frame the round. You had time to prepare, outline points, add rhetoric, whatever it might be. It's literally all of the upsides with none of the downsides. So in tournaments where there are final appeals, literally sponsor spam. That's all I do. That's what I recommend. Sorry, there's people walking in now. Again, I'm at an office. I'm not at my house. All right, differences between the three speeches. And what I really want to highlight here is that the sponsorship or the sponsor takes the responsibility of the author. The authors, right, the person who wrote the bill, they have rights to speaking first. They can sort of step over anyone, and they have full obligation of proof. And we'll get into what I mean when I say full obligation of proof. That's explaining really the solvency in the bill, how and why it works. The sponsor has that same duty when the author isn't present, whatever it might be. They also have that full obligation of proof. That's where a lot of people mess up with the sponsorship. And I understand it's not always possible if nobody wants to stand for a sponsor and you have like an early round or a mid-round AF and it doesn't really have like the section warrants from the bill. Like sometimes that's not possible. But ideally, the sponsorship is written as an authorship. It's just an author without the rights to it. And then early rounders, that's really just extending off the impacts of solvency. They only have like a partial obligation of proof because it should have been done by the author or the sponsor. They're just sort of adding content and adding not fluff, but you know what I mean, like adding depth to the round. All right, the burden of the authorship and sponsorship, and we're going to break this down later, but there's really four things to it. The first is explaining and quantifying the status quo. Before you really get into your bill, you need to explain, why is my bill even necessary in the first place? And that comes from explaining it logically with your own words, but also quantifying it with data. A lot of people don't do that, and I think that's really important, because if you don't quantify it, then the judge is going to be sit here, be like, yeah, sure, that's kind of cool, but like, why? Like, you need to like, if one person's dying a year from trains being too long, like why are we debating shortening trains? Like you need to quantify why it's an issue and why it deserves our attention. Because at the end of the day, you can't address everything, so you have to triage. So just really, as the author sponsor, explain and quantify the status quo, which sort of leads you into the second part of an authorship sponsorship. You have to explain and prove solvency. So that means literally going through your bill. Sometimes it's line by line and explaining the actions your bills take or your bill takes and how it works and why it works. Typically, you prove that how and why, or you should prove that how and why with data, and we'll get into that. You always should assume that your judges haven't read the bill. That's why the author of the sponsor has the duty of framing and explaining the round. Um, that is really it. Like you have to explain the status quo, explain your bill, and explain why it works. End of the day, that's really it. Setting the burden of proof for the neg. This is a more complicated advanced thing. You won't see it in a lot of local circuits, but it's giving the judges and the rest of the round a metric to evaluate off of. Or like if you're from the LD world, like a value criterion. It's what should dictate the round. Like if saving lives dictates a round, then the neg has the burden of proving that that they save lives. Or the AF has the burden of proving that's I'll give you this example. In a climate change debate, the neg has the burden of proving that the AF increases carbon emissions, something like that. It's the burden of proof. And so I'll give you this example from state finals. My state finals was this past Saturday, and we had a bill about oh crap, what was it? Facial recognition technology, banning the use of it. And everybody was up there talking about oh, like it's racist. Oh, but it helps us catch more people quicker, but oh no, it doesn't. And then this one girl gets up there and she had a very good, like important, well-developed speech, but it was about domestic violence against women. And so it was a great point, but it had absolutely no relevance in the round. And because it didn't answer like the burden of proof, the judges could just throw it out because it didn't connect to what the judges should have evaluated that round on. And consequently, like that speech for her didn't go so well because it didn't connect to the round. It didn't connect to the burden of proof. But at really the end of the day, you frame up, you set the round. That's what you should be doing as the author or the sponsor. The burden of early rounders is, again, this is kind of rehashed, but extending the impacts of solvency. So if somebody says, or like you can't, like sponsors only have 3 minutes. They can't do everything. They can't give you every single impact of their legislation. That's the job of for like early round affirmatives, early round negatives is giving more of them. So if somebody says on a climate change debate, we lower climate emissions, someone might also say, oh, we decrease energy costs. Like it's extending those impacts. It's buffer to the first affirmative or the first negative. They also have the duty of establishing and quantifying net harm. Essentially, again, it's all just extending off of the first affirmative speech because a lot of their speech is going to be wrapped up in solvency. So just really developing and adding content to the round. And then last little note here, if the author sponsorship didn't do something like explain why their bill works, they also have the burden of doing that. All right. Next, we're going to get into sort of the structure of like an authorship or a sponsorship speech. What I love to do for mine is to use like thematic narratives for authorships because really the key here is organization. Nothing is worse than a speech that lacks clarity. Nick is great at this. This is why, like, part of the reason he does so well is he's really, really clear and he has great organization. So, what I like to do is to use themes, which we'll get into, like, use themes, use frameworks to create organization. Vanilla authorships very much follow a structure of explaining, quantifying the status quo, then explaining solvency. 2 parts, very simple. I honestly think for people new to authorship sponsorships, roll with that. Like it's great. You can build in themes, which we'll get into right now. Oh, yeah, first burdens. So a burden is a win condition of the round. It's what one side has to prove to win. It's what I was talking about that burden of proof. So here's just 2 example. Your burden has to be um engageable. It has to be possible. Like you can't ask the negation to prove that it's okay to hurt poor people because then nobody's gonna engage with it. Nobody's gonna talk about it. The judge is gonna be like, what? Like that's just not realistic. So a good burden to set is the side that wins this debate is the side that best protects people from poverty. So the affirmative says their advocacy best protects people. The negative says actually it makes it worse. So you should vote for our side. It gives something to evaluate the round on. Burdens are amazing. Do them right. Use them. Oh. All right. Framework. Again, this is more of an extension off of burdens, but it's the foundation for which you choose to analyze the debate. You can also do this in early round speeches. I say do this in early round speeches. And a couple ways you can do this is like giving questions to evaluate the round and then answer them. So like you can say like the first question that will dictate this round is what's the impact when teachers lack blank? What's the impact of XYZ? You can also talk about solvency. Like, does solvency actually come true? That's like a good neg one. If people are like, oh, but um, like if we have a bill about, I don't know, funding pre-K, people are like, oh yes, like great, pre-K is great. The neg can get up there and say, yes, we agree, pre-K is great, but your legislation doesn't empower pre-K, it actually makes it worse. So talking about solvency, that's like a term. And then weighing, you can say like there's undeniable truths on both sides. Which side should we prioritize? And then you have to explain why. Where you can use this, you can use this at the start of a point or at the end of an analysis. That like sort of necessitates a framework. You can drop burdens in right at the ends of points. So say you just wrote a whole point about um, how pre-K allows parents to keep their jobs because now they don't have to drop or to like fall into unemployment to take care of children. You can end that point by saying the side that wins today's debate is a side that um best protects parents from unemployed or best protects people from falling into poverty or like having to give up like aspects of their life. I don't know. That's off the dome stuff. Again, I'm not great at off the dome. That's why I speak early. How you might not want to use it is direct terminology. You'll see this a lot with like weighing. People will be like, but the neg wins on time frame or wins on magnitude. Like that's just a lot of judges won't. First parent judges won't understand that. Experienced judges like that makes sort of their skin crawl, at least for me personally. So just like say it simply. Like at the end of the day, like you don't need fancy debate jargon to explain something. And if you do need fancy debate jargon to explain something, then you're not explaining it well. Simplicity is key. All right, here's a strong vanilla authorship using that questions framework. The first thing's my intro. Um, that's kind of canned. Don't worry about it, but it's kind of funny. You can steal it as you want, just don't use it against me. All right, so we'll break this down. Okay. Okay, yeah, we'll break this down. This is 3 points. The first one is, or the first and second one is really just status quo. The first one is framing. Oh, yeah, let me tell you what the bill was. The bill was to give grants to establish social and emotional learning for teacher programs, and it was giving them funding. Okay, I wrote the authorship for it, or the sponsorship for it, and I wrote it like this. I said the first question that will frame this debate is what does the status quo look like? Because that's important. You have to explain to the judges why is this an issue worth solving? So I said, Education Week quantifies data, whatever. Explains that only 1 out of every 3 teachers has actually done that. Nick, could you let them in? Thank you. And then explained what social and emotional learning was. Then I went to the second question, and this is impacting it. Impacting why is our attention to this issue? Why is your affirmative vote a good thing? So I tell us that like social and emotional learning breaks like biases within teachers. And that's why what's the impact when teachers lack social and emotional learning? And it's that they're more bias bleeds into like their decision-making habits, etc. They hold prejudices against some of their students. All right. Um, and then down here, this is beginning to get into solvency. We'll break this down in a sec. And then lastly, third question. So we just set up the status quo. The last question is solvency. Section warrant explaining the action that the bill takes and then why it works. The why it works is from data saying that like the reason teacher program participation rates are falling is because they don't have funding. My legislation provides funding. That's why it works. All right. So that's just a basic like status quo, quantification, solvency. I kind of overcomplicated that. Now we're getting into something less vanilla. Here's something that I used Emory Finals, and it uses a theme. So I actually misconstrued this theme. President Theodore Roosevelt framed his progressive era policy under 3 C's, not 2 C's, but I was like, that doesn't work. So I kind of overlooked that. Okay, so I gave us 2 things to evaluate the round on, conservation and consumer protection. And that's because I knew that was where the round was going to go. In a climate change debate, we were talking about environment and protecting the wallets of our people, making sure people's energy prices don't go through the roof, etc. So I literally set it up like this. First, conservation. And then at the end of that point, I said my legislation enhances conservation efforts through a proven 3-pronged approach, passing our first C. That's that connection back to the theme. Then I went literally, second is consumer protection. When you do thematic frameworks and structures like this, it's important to have little references throughout the whole piece. That keeps the judges sort of entertained and it builds sort of a consistency within it. And then passes our second metric of consumer protection. That's just a wrap-up point. And then the conclusion obviously connects right into the intro. Pretty basic. All right, now we're going to better break down how I was trying to explain status quo and solvency. So back to this first speech, we're going to break it down. First, up here is above the break line is sort of the explanation of the status quo and the quantification. So I explained with this second card, I don't know if y'all can see my mouse, with the second card, what is social and emotional learning, and that teachers actually lack social and emotional learning. Then I explained what's the impact when they lack that social and emotional learning. And it's that they're more likely to expect like racism and prejudice bleeds into their decision-making habits, and therefore like they're less likely to provide resources to underprivileged kids. And then I began to get into solvency. Down here with this data, I was proving that social and emotional learning increases students' academic performance because teachers know how, like, can better connect with their students and better provide their students with the resources they need to succeed in the classroom. So it's very simple, hopefully, if I'm not overcomplicating it. You explain and quantify the status quo, and then you explain solvency. All right. Solvency with the legislation. This is by far the most important part of an authorship. You have to explain how the legislation works and why it works. You do that in 2 parts. The first is a section warrant. You need to reference and explain to the judges what the bill, like what the action of the bill actually is. A lot of people are, or you need to just assume that the judges have never read the bill in front of them. A lot of them haven't, especially parent judges. And so you need to explain what the hell they're talking about, you know? So, section warrant. Under section 3A, blah, 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 blah. Then you need to, with data, explain why that works. You can get up there and yap and give them all the logical reasoning you want. And for some judges, that might be enough, but for most judges, it won't. You need to give them data explaining why it works. If you don't, you just look like some 15, 16-year-old high schooler yapping up there. Because I know it's like technically role play or whatever, but at the end of the day, that's what judges see us as. So yes, section warrant, the action the bill takes. Data explaining why the action the bill takes works. All right. At the end of the day, the job of the sponsorship. This is like the takeaway here for the authorship, because sometimes I yap and I overcomplicate things. At the end of the day, your job as the author of this and sponsor is to explain the status quo to the judges, explain the bill, and then explain how and why the bill solves that problem. If you do all of that, you're amazing. You've done the job of the sponsorship. Now we're going to get into the early rounder. I had sort of trouble thinking about sort of the differences here. But really, an early round speech is just that sort of adding content to the round. And to add content to the round, you need to have a strong understanding of the basics. You need to be clear, you need to be concise, and you need to be memorable. To be those three things, you need to understand and have strong fundamentals, and then have good rhetoric. All right. So to do this, I'm going to sort of go fast through this section because hopefully most of you understand it. But this is like parts of the speech. And this is really parts of the point. You have a claim, what we're going to break down what makes a good claim. Then you have a warrant explaining how and why that claim's true. And then you have data. Gosh, please, 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 please use data. And we're going to talk about sort of the difference between qualitative and quantitative data. And then you have the analysis impact. Like, bro, like at the end of the day, make me care. Why should we care? If you just tell me that Nick gave this great example, if you tell me that sea levels are rising, but you don't tell me why that should matter to me, like, oh well, sea levels are rising, you know? All right, claim amount 1 to 2, 1, 2, or 3 claims. I would say never do 3 claims because then you're overstretching yourself. It is far more important to have well-developed, fully supportive claims than to try and point hog everything. So I would say 2 should be the vanilla. Go with it. Do 1 if your point is needs 3 minutes to be developed. And when I mean needs 3 minutes, I mean needs 3 minutes. Like it needs to be something complex, but round changing. So I'd say stick to 2 for the most part. That's what I do. What makes a claim good? Clear. It needs to be clear so judges remember it and can write it down on their pad. If you have a 2-sentence claim or a claim that has you talking for like 10 seconds, it's too long. It needs to be clear so I can write it down on my flow. It needs to be memorable so that like 3 speeches or 4 speeches or 10 speeches from now, I can still sort of remember it. It needs to be precise. And by precise, I mean accurate and like, again, goes back to that clarity. And it needs to be impactful. It needs to make me want to sit down my pencil and look up at you and be like, wow, you know? Okay. We're going to play a game of good claim, bad claim. We're going to start with a good claim. First, affirm because Japanese arms sales prevent nuclear proliferation in the region. This is from Harvard Round Robin. Why is it good? Because it's clear. It's very specific as to what the claim is. Japanese arms sales prevent nuclear proliferation in the region. Is it memorable? Yes. Why is it memorable? Well, partially because I threw the word nuclear in there. Anybody hears the word nuclear and they're like, oh my gosh, the world's gonna blow up. Like, right? Nuclear is sort of a trigger word. But really, it's clear, it's concise. It's like what? I don't know, 4, 8, 12 words. Like it's pretty short. So it's clear, concise, memorable. Bad claim. Second, affirm for a better environment. Not even joking. I pulled this out of one of my speeches from freshman year. It's very bland. It's not memorable. It's not specific. It's not quantifiable. Like, what does a better environment look like? Maybe that looks like me not leaving my car on for 3 minutes in the morning because it's cold in Ohio. So yeah, difference there. Oh, all right. Now we're gonna get into warranting quickly. So many people don't know how to do this, and without proper warrants, their whole point goes out the window. Warrants are not just yapping. You need to explain how your argument makes sense and why it's true or connects to the legislation. And sometimes they're like logical warrants that just make sense logically, but sometimes warrants need evidence themselves to prove why they're true. At the end of the day, it's not just yapping. So we're going to go back to this first example. First, affirm because Japanese arms sales prevent nuclear proliferation in the region. The first thing we need to ask ourselves, and really the primary job of the warrant, is to answer any questions like, Why do Japanese arms sales prevent nuclear proliferation? Here's the answer. Arms sales to our allies reduce their incentive to develop independent nuclear arsenals as a means of self-defense. It answers the question of how or why your claim is true. But that's a pretty outlandish, bold claim and warrant. And so sometimes you need data to back that up. So in this example, I'd go find some data about how our arms sales prevented, I don't know, proliferation or something. All right. Ba-doom, ba-doom. All right, next we're going to get into evidence. All right, I'm sure you all know the difference between quantitative versus qualitative. Quantitative is numbers, qualitative is explanations. I honestly, for the most part, don't think of qualitative evidence as really the evidence I'm looking for. Try to have some numbers, percentages, statistics, etc., whatever it might be, in every single speech. That helps give something to the judges. If you say that, like, people die from oceans rising, well, as a judge, I could be like, well, is it one person? Is it two people? Or is it 100,000 people? Or is it a million people? Like, you need to attach some sort of value to it. So I literally, when I'm typing in Google, pro tip here, do dash stats, dash number, something like that. It'll filter your results so you get stats or numbers, etc. Yep. Explanations can sort of help with warrants, or states or like other laws or treaties, something where like a 16-year-old yapping about like the Budapest Memorandum might not be the most credible source, and judges want something like an expert opinion. I don't know why. Okay, yeah. Evidence ethics. Okay, yeah, we're gonna talk about this quickly. Evidence ethics. It is so very important to hold yourself to moral standards when it comes to choosing your evidence. Don't mistag, don't misdate, don't miscite, and please don't make up evidence. I'll give you two reasons. The first is moral, the second is like actually if you want to win. One, it's like why? Like that just like defeats the whole purpose of debate. The whole purpose of debate is to like learn and figure out solutions to complex problems and like prepare you for the real world. And if you're up there yapping and just using fake evidence, then you're not doing your job. Um, so yeah. Second is strategic. Your whole argument is only as good as its weakest link. If somebody ever comes up there and attacks your credibility, you're done. You're out the window. Because it only takes one person to get up there and say you are lying about evidence or misframing it, or here's why your evidence doesn't work anymore, except or like whatever it might be. Your whole point goes out the window because judges don't have a reason to trust it anymore. It's like if he was lying about that, what's stopping him from lying about everything else? So just use good evidence ethics. When choosing sources, immediately throw out any mainstream news like CNN, Fox. This should be a no-brainer. Like, come on, find something else. Is it really what it's actually citing? A lot of articles will be like super sources or like data dumps, and like specifically the Cato Institute, Brookings, etc. They'll cite a gazillion sources inside of their articles. That can be good because you can find like a better sounding source. Um, or you can find like some better numbers that are deeper in there. How old is it? I'd say like unless absolutely necessary, don't go older than 2021. Old data just gets a little like why it immediately prompts a question of why should we trust data from like 2018? So I just say don't go older than 2021. I'd say like does it sound reputable? Like green, why should we like if someone gets up there in a final round? Oh yes, Kabir. I think we're
Um,
gonna take questions. But yeah, go ahead. Is it quick?
this was just relevant to this. So, for the older things, say it was like qualitative, like a report or a theory by XX journal or something like that. Would that work past
Yeah.
2021?
Yeah. Like if it's a political theory or some principle that stays true throughout time and like doesn't shift, then yes, it's absolutely applicable. Um, I would say specifically for numbers, data sources, and like trends, don't go older than 2021.
Okay,
All right,
thank you.
of course. Doesn't sound reputable. Green Planet for you, like what? Don't what? Also, pet peeve here, don't say greenplanetforyou.com. I've literally heard people use the .com and like no shame on you if you do, but it just doesn't make you sound good. I just say Green Planet for you, but really find different stuff. Say like the Cato Institute, etc. Here's a big, oh, I can't have it. I can't click the link of them in the slideshow, but I'll share it after. Oh wait, I can't. Let's go. Here's like some good sources that I've compiled. Um, I'd say blue sources. Yeah, this is just a source doc. I can send this out later. Just places that are well known for being reputable and they also sound good, like the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. All right. Doo-doom, doo-doom. All right. Impact. This is just like, bro, make me care. Like at the end of the day, you can have the greatest argument, but if you don't make me care, then I'm not going to vote you. So make me care. Here's an example. This was a response that I wrote in a responses doc, but it serves our purpose here. Consumer prices will skyrocket in the AF world. Haha. Our warrant. Banning fracking takes a massive portion of our energy out of our economy. This leaves less supply to meet the energy demand of Americans. That's the logical warrant explaining it. Now we're going to, with data, quantify that. The Information Administration quantified in 2023 that 25% of energy in the US comes from fracking, right? So now we're connecting sort of back into the debate. Affirming creates a condition in which a quarter of the energy sector disappears. See where we're going with this? Now we get right into the impact. This whole first like card, I guess, is a link from or not a link, but like a warrant as to why these impacts come true. Here's a report. 2021 report from the US Department of Energy finds that fracking ban would increase electricity costs by 480 billion and natural gas costs by 400 billion. This is what I like to call like a high level impact. It's a really big number across a huge amount of people, and that's a great for like big number throw at your judges. Your judges go, wow, big number. But at the end of the day, you want to get it further than that. You want to zoom in and paint a picture in the judge's mind of why it should matter to them, what it means for them, their family, etc. So go even further, talk about it on the individual. Increased prices means so much more than we might realize. Found that with just a 5% increase in energy prices last year, more than 1/3 of US households say they reduced or skipped basic expenses such as medicine or food to pay for an energy bill. That's shattering to the judge's mind. Like with a 5% increase in energy prices, people are skipping out on meals or skipping out on going to the doctors. That paints a crystal clear picture in their mind of what happens in the affirmative world, which gives them a reason to negate. This is a connection back to the theme at the end here. Getting back into rhetoric, like millions of low Americans are struggling to make ends meet. This legislation only puts the American dream further out of reach. The theme for this was like the American dream is built on three fundamental principles: economic opportunity, freedom, and safety. So just the little sprinkles. So now we're gonna get into rhetorical choices. I know I've been yapping for like 45 minutes. Y'all are probably tired of me. But early rounders are always written beforehand, so you have time to make good rhetoric. What is rhetoric? It's frosting on a cake. You don't want to have too much of it and it ruins it, and you end up like trying to scrape it off with a knife because I hate frosting. But too little and your cake feels like a little bear. It's like looking a little ugly. So you want to just have like the Goldilocks amount. You can also always create good rhetoric by connecting it to a theme. So make your themes relevant, make them funny, make them serious, sort of do what you want. Again, Congress is about having fun, try new things, be creative, like you're smarter than you think. My number one tip is get rid of the canned stuff. Like democracy dies in darkness. Justice delayed is justice denied. Like everybody and their mom has heard that. Like, don't use it. We can go band for band with that stuff all day. Like, just throw it out. Get rid of it. It doesn't matter. It just makes you sound stupid and like you were rushing through stuff. Like another example, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Or I heard this one 3 times at Harvard, 3 times, and then it states, I was bad at math in pre-calc, or like I got a C in my pre-calc class, but this legislation adds up. Like what? What? Like it's a slap in the face. It's not sure it might be clever to a judge who's never heard it before, who like really get like loves the corny stuff, but the majority of judges are actually going to be like, "Oh." So chess framework too. I low-key use this all the time for my foreign policy, so I can't really harp on it too much, but it's really canned, especially now. It's getting very overused. So I would say stay away from it. Here's some good rhetoric. Like these hasty decisions turn our judiciary into the Joker, dealing out wild card decisions. Like when rioters were 6 feet from our doors, their trust in us was 6 feet under. Why is that good rhetoric? Well, one, it's specific. It's you can't throw it in any sentence and it makes sense. When I mean specific, I mean it's relevant to the legislation, it's relevant to the debate, and it's interesting. Like you haven't heard it before. Part of the reason rhetoric is good is because people haven't heard it before. It's not canned. So I just say find rhetoric that's specific, relevant, and interesting, and not canned. Where can you find good rhetoric? Speeches. I'm an AP Lang right now, and I cut so this is so embarrassing, but I cut some of the synthesis essay stuff so we get, or like rhetorical analysis essay stuff, because a lot of the time they're speeches. Like the last one I did was JFK's 1962 speech at Rice University, and he had some absolute bars in there. And so take like lesser known speeches and you can find some cool stuff in there. Vivek Ramaswamy, his presidential bid speech had some bars in it too. You have to cut out the political stuff, but the bars are in there. So that can be kind of cool. Don't cut other people Congress's speeches. A lot of people love to use Hunter Brown or um Seabrooks, I'm blanking on his first name, about like, oh, pen and paper. No, bombs and bullets broke the Polisario front, but pen and paper can piece them back together. Like, it, it just makes you sound just don't use old competitor stuff. I guarantee you someone has heard it, and if they haven't, well, it's still a risk to take. Use your head. Like you're way smarter than you think. Like these people came up with it, so can you. You're not like don't discredit yourself. You can make plays on words, like developing parallels and breaking them. I like to do stuff with like okay, I'm gonna reset that sentence. You can create parallels like with the first word of each sentence, like P's. Like when I don't know. I can't think of a great example off my head, but just like syllables, rhymes, etc. Or like when people go into our criminal justice system, petty thieves, and come out hardened criminals, like you're drawing a parallel there. Parallels can be very powerful. Oh, we just did it. Playing on with P's. Parallels can be very powerful. Parallels can push. I don't know. I'm just getting distracted. All right, bringing it all together. This last speech is from Senator Alakwa. No, Representative Alakwa. NSDA House Finals, Senate House. Yes, House Finals last year. It's a little boring, but he has great structure, so I think we're gonna watch it just to see. Let me make sure. Let me make sure I can actually. Okay, if I play this, can y'all hear it?
For centuries, this Congress has prided itself as being able to bring the apple of peace and prosperity to the most underserved across the world. We uphold lives and I implore you all.
There's the parallel. Wait, pardon?
I don't know if it was just me, but like I heard the first 10 seconds and then I went quiet. It could have been
Yeah,
just
Breck, you can't mute yourself after you play the
Oh
video.
yeah. And the sound was coming.
Okay. Okay, that's my bad. That's my bad. Okay, but okay, what I was gonna say is you could hear it in the beginning, like peace and prosperity to the people of the Northern Triangle. Like he did the three things with the P's. Like that can be kind of cool.
For centuries, this Congress has prided itself as being able to bring the gavel of peace and prosperity to the most underserved across the world. We uphold lives, ensure that economies are stabilized, and make sure that people can live fruitful lives. When it comes to today's piece of legislation to renew our promise to the people of the Northern Triangle, I implore you all to pass. Principally, I want you to pass this legislation to improve the quality of life in the Northern Triangle. Let's characterize the problem in the status quo that is driving our dire necessitation.
Okay, right there, he sort of set a burden. He said,
that is driving our dire necessity to improve the quality of life in you all to pass. Principally, I want you to pass this legislation to improve the quality of life in the Northern Triangle.
he didn't directly do it, but he sort of set a burden of improving the quality of life. So the neg can say and respond to that like our sponsor gave us the burden of proving or improving the quality of life in the Northern Triangle. Here's the thing, Carsey actually makes the quality of life worse.
Let's characterize the problem in the status quo.
There we go. Now we're going to get into status quo, characterizing it.
That is driving our dire necessitation to pass this legislation. Violence in the region is sky high. As the Center for Strategic and International Studies explains, in April of 2023, the Northern Triangle has some of the highest crime rates in the world, primarily due to gangs which run free across the country. But what is the biggest reason why these gangs exist in the first place? As the United Nations Office on the Coordination of Human Affairs explains, in March of 2018, almost 60% of individuals in the Northern Triangle currently live in poverty, leaving people to like gangs to support their daily livelihoods, which have almost 95% rates of impunity in the legal system. But how does my legislation specifically change this issue for the...
Now we get into the second half of his speech, solvency. So he began to sort of get into solvency when he started explaining why the quality of life is so bad in the Northern Triangle. When he explained sort of the causal reason behind it, now he can explain how his legislation addresses it. So we're going to see sort of more solvency here.
For the better. Section 1A of today's legislation
Section warrant, very important.
Invest $25 billion in the Central American Regional Security Initiative, and another $25 billion will be allocated directly to foreign direct investment, which can benefit countries across the Northern Triangle. Why is that so beneficial? As the United States of Michigan finds in University of 2020, Carsey involvement in the
United States of wait, what did he say? United States of Michigan University.
In the past from the United States and the region has dropped homicide rates by 54%. Representatives understand that by passing today's legislation, we could create a cooling effect of the violence that has gripped the lives of so many people across the region.
That's sort of getting into rhetoric and painting a picture in the judge's mind. The violence that has ripped, like ripped is such a strong, precise word. It puts an image in the judge's heads. That's great. Don't just say like, it hurts them. It hurts them. Like, it hurts them. Like that could be like a scrape on their knee, right? You need to paint a picture.
That leaves us with two critical impacts. First off, you increase economic stability in the region. As the Atlantic Council explains, in March of 2021, investing in the private sector of the Northern Triangle is crucial to formalizing over 60% of the economy, which is currently employed in informal, low quality, and highly unstable jobs across the region. Today's legislation specifically does that, allowing us to finally allow millions of Northern Triangle civilians to have access to economic opportunity, which they previously never did. But second, you reduce the displacement of individuals in the Northern Triangle that are currently fleeing to the north. As the United States Global Leadership Coalition explains, in April of 2021, studies have found a striking correlation that for every 10 murders in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, 6 children attempt to seek safety in the United States of America. Today's legislation finally allows children in the Northern Triangle to have to stop fleeing their homeland due to violence, increasing the benefits brought to their economy, and making sure that countless lives can be saved in the process. strike down the gavel of peace and prosperity for the people.
Alrighty. It's a great example. You did a good job with that.